Europe, a continent with a rich history of conflict stretching back over 4,000 years before the United States even existed, has long been a force of innovation in naval warfare. From the Greeks commanding triremes and fireboats, to the Vikings sailing across the Atlantic to stumble upon North America centuries before Columbus, and later leading the way in submarine and combined arms naval tactics, Europe has always been at the forefront of maritime ingenuity and power. I'm Tuomas, a former officer in the Finnish Defense Forces, and in today's video we'll look at Europe's incredible naval capacity and why there's absolutely no reason for anyone in Europe or the rest of the free world to buy naval assets from the US, now that USA is officially voting against the rest of us in the UN. This is the fourth video in our series so far, and if you want to look at the other parts where we covered tanks, armored vehicles, air defense, artillery and drones, I'll leave those in the comments and description below. While other continents generally have a fairly straightforward relationship to naval capacity, Europe has a few challenging factors which has propelled its naval innovation forward throughout time. In example, some of the real pioneers in Europe, like Sweden, France, Great Britain and Norway, often have wildly varying conditions that they need to take into account. Take Sweden as an example. One side of the country is on the Baltic Sea, with less buoyancy and salinity, than the other side, which is part of the fairly stable Atlantic Ocean. France faces a similar issue, where one part of its navy is in the Atlantic, while the other is in the much saltier and warmer Mediterranean Sea. The same can be said for Denmark, Germany, Spain, and many other European nations. While these issues may have made countries focus on other areas of their armed forces, naval capacity has always been extremely important in Europe. And while operating a fleet, in example in the Baltic Sea, means that your naval vessels can't displace as much weight or make as much noise as they could in the Atlantic, it also means that the naval technology coming out of Europe is unparalleled on the world stage. As naval technology is a big subject, I'll expand this video into two parts, with this first video covering surface vessels, and the second video will cover submarines, naval drones, armament, and naval air assets. Before we move on to the actual gear, let's look at Europe's imports of naval equipment for the last 10 or so years. The fact of the matter is that Europe is fairly self-reliant in the naval department, and while the US does deliver some naval technology to Europe, most of it is weapon systems and auxiliary assets like helicopters. The main reason for this is that American naval assets are generally far too expensive and not suitable for European needs. The US once exported more than 30% of all ships and submarines in the world, while it is now languishing somewhere around 3 to 4%. Notable naval exports from the US include Seahawks and weapon systems like the Sea Sparrow and Phalanx. And while these systems add up to a fair chunk of cash, Europe's dependence on American weaponry in their navies is nowhere near as heavy as with their air forces and land armies. Now, on with the show. It would be amiss of me to start anywhere else than what has been the largest asset on the world's oceans since Japan and Great Britain introduced the first aircraft carriers in 1922. In Europe, half of the world's aircraft carrier nations operates a total of 6 out of 23 total aircraft carriers in service in the world today, while both France and Italy is currently working on adding one more carrier each. Being the largest naval operator in Europe, it is natural to start our tour of these systems in Great Britain. Historically, the UK has had one of the biggest navies in the world, and while that is still the case, the Royal Navy has seen a steady decline since its heyday around World War II. A long-standing plan for the UK was to develop their aircraft carrier program in order to project power globally. And while that is still likely the case, more and more voices within the British military is arguing that the 2 aircraft carriers currently operational in the Royal Navy was likely not the right decision, especially with how Europe's only credible threat appears to be a land engagement against Russia on the continent. That aside, the 2 Queen Elizabeth-type aircraft carriers are the 2 largest warships ever built in the UK. They can field up to 48 F-35s each in case of war and come with a whole host of auxiliary elements on top of their strike capacity. The UK carrier program has not been without issues. Among other things, it ran over the cost estimates of £3.9 billion and is now projected to have cost £6.2 billion in total. It was built by the very capable Rosyth Dockyards as a cooperation between BAE Systems, Thales, Babcock International and others. Secondly, because Italy also currently operates 2 aircraft carriers, the choice naturally fell on their capability here. Fincantieri, which is one of Europe's premier naval producers, has produced both of Italy's current operational carriers. First, Italy has the older Cavour carrier, which hosts around 20 to 30 Harriers and F-35s, or a mix between these and various helicopters. Italy's newest carrier, the Trieste, is a so-called landing helicopter dock, meaning that it will mainly only operate systems which can take off and land vertically, which is likely the way that many more carrier programs will go in future with the advancement in attack drones. As we've mentioned in our video, this means that Italy is one of the states in Europe who is totally dependent on the F-35 along with the UK, and that may become challenging to its independence as we discussed in our video on the systems in this jet. Now, onto the country in Europe which is likely the most independent in their military industry, France. France's sole carrier, aptly named Charles de Gaulle, is likely the most experienced and mission-proven aircraft carrier in Europe. Compared to the other nations in Europe with carriers, France is the only nation who almost exclusively operates European aircraft from its carrier. The only asset they operate which is American is their 2 Hawkeye surveillance planes. It fits 30 Rafales, 2 of the aforementioned Hawkeyes and 5 helicopters of various types. Its armament is also 100% European, with Asters and Mistral missiles and Nexter guns. Another country who will feature a lot in this episode is Spain, mainly due to having some of the biggest wharfs in Europe. Spain has delivered warships to a whole host of European and international nations, including Norway, Thailand, Argentina, Australia, and many more. Navantia is Spain's largest producer of naval military hardware, and they have made both Spain's only pure aircraft carrier, the Príncipe de Asturias, as well as their multi-purpose light aircraft carrier, Juan Carlos I. The Príncipe de Asturias operates a fleet of around 30 aircraft, and as with Italy, Spain still operates older Harriers from this platform. Their newer Juan Carlos multi-purpose carrier is somewhat smaller and is able to carry 8 jets and a mix of 4 heavy helicopters. The Juan Carlos design and features have been sold to Turkey, who also operates 2 versions of this light carrier. Before we move on to destroyers, we'll briefly discuss the size of Europe's combined navies by displacement. Displacement is essentially the amount of water a ship displaces, so in other terms it shows how large ships are, rather than their capability. The largest navy in the world is the US with 7.4 million tons displaced. Europe has 4 navies in the top 10 in the world: the Royal British Navy, the French Marine Nationale, the Italian Marina Militare, and the Turkish Navy. And if you combine all European NATO navies, you get somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million tons, which makes it roughly the same size as China's navy and about 1 million tons larger than Russia's. Now, displacement doesn't necessarily mean everything, especially with many European nations having worked extensively on light variants for the Baltic, but it does provide a good measuring stick. Now, on to the second heaviest class that European nations operate, destroyers. As with aircraft carriers, it's mainly the same nations that operate these heavy warships: France, Britain, Italy, Spain, and Turkey. As Turkey's variant is a resold US-made frigate, I'll leave this out of this overview. Britain operates 6 destroyers of the Type 45 variant. Built by BAE Systems in the UK, the Type 45 Daring-class destroyers are among the most advanced air defense warships in the world. Designed primarily to protect carrier strike groups and fleet assets from aerial threats, they are equipped with the powerful Sea Viper missile system, utilizing Aster-15 and Aster-30 missiles to intercept enemy aircraft and missiles at ranges of up to 120 kilometers. Each ship displaces around 8,500 tons, making them the largest surface combatants in the Royal Navy outside of aircraft carriers. Their cutting-edge Samson radar provides unparalleled tracking and targeting capability, while their integrated electric propulsion system allows for efficient and quiet operations. The Horizon class, built by France's naval group in collaboration with Italy's Fincantieri, serves as the French and Italian Navy's primary air defense destroyer. These ships, displacing 7,300 tons, similarly to the British variant, feature the Aster-15 and Aster-30 anti-air missile system. Their advanced MPAR radar system enables high-precision tracking, and they carry Exocet anti-ship missiles for offensive capabilities. Built by Navantia, Spain's Álvaro de Bazán-class destroyers are among the most technologically advanced surface combatants in Europe, featuring the Aegis combat system used by the US Navy's Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. With a displacement of 6,400 tons, they are optimized for fleet air defense and multi-role warfare. Armed with SM-2 and ESSM air defense missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and torpedoes, they offer a comprehensive strike capability while also acting as a command hub for naval task forces. Spain operates 5 of these destroyers, with plans to build a 6th unit. Now, I know that some people will likely argue that the Álvaro de Bazán class isn't a destroyer, and while the size is more like a frigate, I'll go with the NATO designations in this video, even though NATO designates the exact same ship when exported to Norway and renamed Fridtjof Nansen class a frigate. The next class we'll discuss is the frigate, and luckily for all of us, we've already covered one of them in the destroyer class as we just mentioned. However, this is where we start to go outside the big maritime giants of Europe, and now it starts to get interesting in the different variations on offer, and I'll have to go by export numbers and performance. Many countries around Europe create very capable frigates: Germany, France, Denmark, the Netherlands, Poland, Italy and Spain, to mention a few. I know some Danes will likely roast me for this, but I'm going to have to go with the Danish Iver Huitfeldt class as my first pick here. While Denmark's flagship in this class had some trouble with its anti-air munitions when working in the Red Sea against the Houthis recently, its export numbers and unique modularity tips the scales in its favor for me. The Iver Huitfeldt's modular loadout options is what makes it so special. The Mark 41 vertical launch system allows them to carry a flexible mix of air defense, anti-ship, and land attack missiles. Their modular design makes them highly adaptable for different mission profiles, enabling operators to customize their weapons and sensor loadout based on specific operational needs. This cost-effective approach, achieved by reusing design elements from the Absalon-class support ships, has made the Iver Huitfeldt class highly attractive for export. Think of it as a way to customize your navy for each mission, rather than having to have 10 warships for 10 different tasks. Denmark achieves the same with 3 of this frigate by swapping the loadout around, a bit like the Lego from the same country. The Royal Netherlands Navy selected a heavily modified variant as the basis for their new De Zeven Provinciën class replacement, while both the UK, US, Poland, Indonesia, and others have already started building their future frigates based on Odense Shipyard's design and license. As with the 2 previous categories, the French and Italians have worked together to make the FREM frigates, which by all standards are as advanced as Denmark's frigates, though with an added layer of French and Italian-made equipment on board, rather than US missile systems. With Trump behaving the way he is, Europe ideally needs to look towards Italy and France's way of procuring mainly European equipment for their navies. Last but not least, the first entry of a German-made ship on our list. ThyssenKrupp's Baden-Württemberg class is also definitely worth a mention. While the other ships on our frigate list have been heavily anti-air focused, this modern marvel is much more heavily focused on land attack and is equipped with a wide range of missile and cannons, including the Naval Strike Missile. Generally, this makes sense, as most of Germany's navy will likely be tied up in the Baltic Sea, where coastal engagements are most likely. Now, time to move on to the category where I find most of my favorite military ships, corvettes. We're now down at a size of ship which enables most nations to build them, and in this category we'll find some of the real technological heavyweights in Europe, especially surrounding the Baltic Sea. You can't really cover corvettes without mentioning Sweden's super stealthy and deadly Visby class. These ships are so stealthy that during trials, even the most modern radar in other NATO navies struggle with picking it up, and due to the weight, it can dip in and out of the small inlets and bays of the Baltic Sea and be a deadly combatant with its huge arsenal of Swedish-made missiles, cannon and torpedoes. It's armed with the British-made CAM anti-air system, which is not as widely adopted elsewhere, and is still pushing the limits of naval warfare 15 years since its inception. While Sweden likely has the best corvette in the world, Norway likely has the second best. The Skjold class is a literal monster. It's the fastest naval vessel on the globe. It carries several naval strike missiles, and it is likely even stealthier than the Visby. Its main purpose is to dart in and out of Norway's massive fjord systems, fire off its deadly payload, and disappear faster than any other ship can follow it. It is Norway's ace against Russia's northern fleet, located just across Norway's northern border, and Norway's 6 Skjold corvettes would likely inflict massive damage within hours of Russia ever attempting to attack Norway. I'm going to go out on a limb here and mention a corvette which is made in Europe, but not currently operated by a European nation, namely Dutch Damen Group's Sigma corvette. Weirdly, the Dutch Navy have not opted for this design, while the company has exported it to Indonesia, Morocco, Mexico, and Colombia. It comes in both a fast attack variant, a bigger frigate-sized variant, and a normal corvette variant. Poland and Greece are considering the fast attack variants for their navies, so it is a bit weird how the Dutch Navy haven't considered this homegrown excellent corvette. Alright folks, I think we've had our fill of seamen for a Friday. While diving into Europe's naval power, we quickly realized there's just way too much to cram into one episode. So, next week, we'll be back to cover everything from fast attack craft to submarines and firepower. In the meantime, you can check out the other episodes in this series. I'll drop them in both the description and the comments. And as always, have an awesome weekend.